Today we will talk about a movie called Mandingo. The movie starts with Warren Maxwell and his son Hammond hiring new workers for their estate. After they finish, they check on a worker named Big Pearl, who is being looked after by their trusted doctor. The doctor says Big Pearl is fine, just in heat, and recommends some exercise. He tells Hammond to help with this. Soon after, the Maxwells have a meal with friends and discuss the uprisings happening across the country. This makes Warren upset, and he starts complaining. Hammond tells him to calm down because his rheumatism might get worse. This makes Warren even angrier because he feels helpless. One friend then suggests using one of his workers' bellies as a footrest to help with the rheumatism. After eating, Hammond gets up and tells a worker to get Big Pearl ready for her exercise. As Hammond leaves, his father's friend says Hammond seems like a good guy and might make a good breeder. Warren, troubled, explains that Hammond is shy because of his leg problems. He says a pony stepped on Hammond's knee when he was young, which caused his disability. Hammond goes to meet Big Pearl, who is being prepared for her exercise. He starts the exercise recommended by the doctor. Meanwhile, a young boy tries to sneak a look from the door and gets pinched on the ear for being sneaky. At the estate, a worker named Cicero is upset because the other workers aren't standing up for themselves. Cicero asks me to read something to the workers, hoping it will inspire them to act. After working with Big Pearl, Hammond catches the workers and finds out that me can read. He tells his father, who is angry because he doesn't want his workers to be educated. Warren tells Hammond to punish me by taking out one of his eyes, but Hammond argues that a simple beating is enough. The next day, Hammond hangs me upside down and punishes me. Surprisingly, Hammond has no stomach for such deeds, so he goes outside in the middle of it. Not long after, a man arrives who takes over and punishes me more intensely. Hammond rushes to stop the man, who reveals himself as his cousin Charles. Sometime later, Warren reveals that Charles is there because his family wants to borrow money. In exchange, they are willing to marry off Hammond's cousin Blanche to Hammond. At first, Hammond protests, saying he knows nothing about marriage. However, Warren is adamant that Hammond marry because he already wants him to sire an heir. So he sends him away to claim his cousin Blanche as his wife. On their way back to Charles's home, Hammond and Charles stop by Mr. Wallace's estate to acquire a partner for Big Pearl. Sadly, Mr. Wallace says he has already lost the man Hammond wanted for Big Pearl. Later that night, Mr. Wallace brings ladies to keep Hammond and Charles company for the night. Charles immediately gets rough with his partner, causing Hammond to feel sick and leave for the other room. Ellen follows Hammond and starts looking at him weirdly. Insecure, Hammond calls her out, thinking it's because of his disabled leg. However, Ellen says she finds him strange because he seems to care about what would happen to them. As the two continue to talk, true romance suddenly blossoms between them. The next day, Hammond goes to an auction for workers where he finds a pure M dingo being auctioned off for a hefty price. A lady steps up to check on the fine specimen and if his package is what she's looking for. Satisfied, she offers to buy the man, but Hammond manages to outbid her and snag the prize man for himself. Hammond celebrates and learns that the dingo's name is Meat. He also says that he'll pick him up after a few days. After the auction, Hammond arrives at Charles's home and finally meets his cousin Blanche. For some reason, Charles doesn't seem comfortable with the idea of having his cousin marry his sister. He confronts Blanche, saying he'll tell Hammond about their Alabama escapades. Blanche says she wants to marry Hammond because he's a prized catch. She also tells Charles she wants to leave their home and family for good. Blanche and Hammond get to talking, and Hammond makes it clear that he intends to marry her. When Hammond tries to kiss Blanche, she tells him not to unless it's just a cousin kiss. Since he intends to put a ring on it, Hammond gives Blanche more than just a cousin kiss. Not long after that, the two are already on their way to their honeymoon. After their first romantic night together, Hammond becomes restless and troubled. Blanche asks him what's wrong, and he confronts her, saying he knows she has been touched by another man before him. Blanche throws a tantrum to deny that she was touched by another man. As for Hammond, he leaves and tries to clear his head by visiting a local brothel. There he gets into a fight with the brothel's bodyguard. They try to break up the fight but stop when a rich man named D says he'll give $1,000 to the winner. Everyone goes into a frenzy as they bet on the fight. Meat comes out on top, and Hammond is extremely happy about it. D offers to buy Meat for twice the price he was bought, but Hammond declines the offer. Instead, D asks him to let Meat fight his fighter in a few months, and Hammond agrees. On their way home, Hammond stops by Mr. Wallace's place to hire Ellen. Curious, Blanche asks if Ellen is to become Meat's partner, and Hammond tells her no. Blanche immediately realizes that what she's looking at is a new challenger. When the couple finally arrives home, Hammond tells Blanche they'll pretend to be a happy couple in front of his father. Everyone is excited to see Hammond come home with Blanche. Warren, in particular, is ecstatic that his son came home with a wife and a pure dingo. Shortly after arriving, Hammond and Blanche get right into being a married couple and start arguing. Hammond decides never to sleep in the same room with Blanche. In return, she calls him out for wanting to sleep with Ellen instead. Hammond shows off Meat to his father, who inspects him carefully. They immediately pair Meat up with Big Pearl and start training him for his upcoming fight. On one occasion, Warren lets Meat bathe in a huge pot of hot water. Hammond is worried, but Warren says it's a good way to toughen Meat's hide in preparation for the fight. After one of their sparring sessions, Hammond praises Meat for his excellent performance. When Hammond gets into the house, he gets scolded by Warren for neglecting his husbandly duties to Blanche. He tells him to get down to business because he wants a grandchild. Hammond goes to Blanche's room for the sake of his father's request. Sadly, despite Blanche begging him, Hammond just can't seem to get into the mood. He leaves her be and spends the night with Ellen instead. While they lay in bed, Ellen tells Hammond she's with child. She then asks if he can give her son freedom when the time comes. Hammond initially gets angry and declines her request, but eventually changes his mind when he sees Ellen upset. One day, Mr. Wallace comes to the Maxwells' estate to inform them that Cicero started an uprising. Hammond drives with Meat to help Mr. Wallace deal with Cicero and his men. Hiding in a barn, Cicero gets shot while trying to escape, and Hammond sends Meat to catch him. When Meat manages to hold Cicero long enough for the rest of the group to capture him, Mr. Wallace's men prepare to hang Cicero. During that time, Cicero blames Meat for his capture and says his death will be on Meat's hands. As Cicero hangs, Hammond becomes uncomfortable and leaves with Meat. The time for Meat's scheduled fight arrives, so Hammond and Warren leave the estate with him. During that time, Blanche tells one of their maids to bring Ellen to her. While waiting, she takes out her riding crop and tests it out on the furniture. Realizing what Blanche plans to do, the maid tells her that Ellen is pregnant. Sadly, this only infuriates Blanche even more because she knows it's Hammond's child Ellen is carrying. Blanche lashes out at Ellen, promising to beat her child out of her womb. Ellen tries to run away, but Blanche catches her and pushes her down the stairs, resulting in her miscarriage. Meat's fight with Dee's prized fighter, Topaz, begins. Meat immediately finds himself at a disadvantage because of Topaz's boxing training. Eventually, Hammond can no longer stomach the beating Meat is taking and tries to surrender the fight. Unwilling to let Hammond lose face with his defeat, Meat channels his inner vampire and defeats Topaz. Dee congratulates Hammond and this time offers to buy Meat for $110,000. To Warren's disappointment, Hammond declines Dee's offer yet again. On their way home, Warren shows Hammond some jewelry he wants him to give Blanche as a present. When they arrive, the head maid immediately informs Warren about what Blanche did to Ellen. Warren immediately checks on Ellen and orders her to never tell Hammond what truly happened to avoid further conflict. When Hammond enters the room, Warren tells him that Ellen accidentally fell and had a miscarriage. Hammond immediately comforts Ellen, who honors Warren's request out of fear. However, she starts feeling better when Hammond gives her a pair of ruby earrings. Meanwhile, Warren goes upstairs to scold Blanche for her recent unladylike behavior. When Hammond joins them, he tells his son to give Blanche her presents and get to work on making him his grandchild. Blanche is happy to receive a wonderful present and immediately wears it during dinner. She happily talks about what she wants to do once they have a new house. Hearing her, Warren plans to lay off some of their workers the next day to turn her dreams into a reality. Sadly, Blanche's enthusiasm quickly fades when she notices Ellen wearing ruby earrings. She takes off her necklace and storms out of the room. Hammond goes after Blanche and they have a heated fight. During that time, Blanche accidentally confirms that Charles was the one who touched her before Hammond, which makes him leave her immediately. The next day, Hammond leaves to take care of the workers they're laying off from the estate. He takes Ellen to accompany him on the journey. As scornful Blanche sees this, she finally decides to get back at her husband. Blanche summons Meat to her room. Meat tries to tell her not to enter the room, but since he respects her, he follows what his wife tells him to do. Once inside, Blanche tells Meat to do whatever she tells him to, because if not, she'll lie to Hammond saying that Meat forced himself on her. With Meat's submission, Blanche helps herself to some BBC. Since there's nothing he can do to stop her, Meat decides to enjoy himself instead. When Hammond returns, he learns Big Pearl and Meat's child has arrived and is happy about it. He then notices that Meat is acting a little strange. Later, Hammond also wonders why Blanche is acting a little too ladylike and kind toward him. Eventually, she reveals she's pregnant, which makes Warren happy, and Hammond starts caring about her more. The next day, Hammond notices that Ellen is jealous of Blanche's baby, so he ensures her that she will always be his woman no matter what happens. Time goes by and Blanche gives birth. The doctor realizes the baby isn't Hammond's and decides to return it. Hammond finds out the truth and is heartbroken. Unable to handle the betrayal, he decides to kill Blanche. The next day, Hammond grabs his rifle and goes to confront Meat. Ellen tries to stop him, but Hammond reminds her of her place in his life. Hammond and Warren make Meat get ready to be cooked. When Hammond tells Meat to get into the boiling water, Meat refuses. He tries to explain that he was just following Blanche's orders and meant no disrespect. Angry, Hammond shoots Meat in the shoulder. Meat says he thought Hammond was different from others. Hammond shoots Meat again, and as Meat falls into the boiling water, Hammond tries to finish him off with a pitchfork. Meat fights back but gets pushed down. He grabs Hammond's rifle and points it at him. Warren tries to scare Meat into giving up, but Meat shoots Warren instead. Meat then escapes while Hammond is left grieving his father and questioning his life. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.